I'm Chris Turner, and this is the Empowered Parent Podcast. Greetings, and welcome to the Empowered Parent Podcast. Joining me, as always, are Ryan and Kayla North. Hi, guys.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Chris. You see how fancy we are in two separate rooms here at our house?
I see. We are recording this via a new little software package we're trying out. And yes, we're each in a separate location, undisclosed location, I guess I should say.
Yes,
even though we know it's our houses, but our houses are still undisclosed.
Kayla, that's a really cool...
and shall remain so.
Well, no, I think I'm going to put your address and cell phone number on Facebook.
Let's not do that.
Turn my head like
yeah,
this.
I mean, Chris, look at that amazing guitar over Kayla's shoulder. That is a Les Paul Gibson, my friend.
I'm aware.
I know you're aware.
Sorry for our podcast listeners that can't see this.
Well, that's probably something that we should talk about. That if they want to be able to see this, they probably should become Patreon subscribers.
That's a good idea, because we'll put this in the patron group. And I mean, you have multiple layers, including we got patrons who are supporting us at $100 a month. They get free coaching, so that's cool. But you can do it for as little as $5 a month, or 10 or 20 or something. There's all different kind of tiers, and so we'll have that in the show notes and how to become a patron.
It's been really fun getting to know some of our patrons that are at those higher levels where they are getting the Q&A, and we're like really getting to know their families and doing coaching sessions and stuff. It's been kind of fun. So,
all right. Well, let's shout out to one of them, Will and Carrie Ann Standfest.
Yes.
There you go.
They are lots of fun. All right. So what are we talking about?
What you got for us, Christopher?
Well, I thought that what we could talk about would be routines and rhythms, because school has started in many parts of the country, including here in Texas, except it's not really school like our kids are used to. Most districts are still virtual and are not ready for students to return. And even when students do return to these school buildings, it's not a requirement. Many students will be choosing to remain at home and do schooling virtually. And this whole thing has kind of upset the rhythms that a lot of families have within their homes. You know, there's an ebb and flow to how our day usually goes, depending on it being a weekday or the weekend. And this has kind of thrown all that for a loop. And within those rhythms, we have routines as families for different times of our day. And, those have been thrown out of whack too. So I thought this would be a good subject for us to hash out for our listeners.
Well, I heard something last week now that schools are back in session, and whether that means that the kids are in the school building, they're at home, or some hybrid version of that. There's been a lot of productivity in the workplace that's just really been changed, because parents who worked through August without having to, the kids were at home, but they didn't really have to do anything in terms of actually actively educating the children, are now really struggling with it. And I think there are actually provisions in some of the relief acts that have been passed, particularly the ones related to paycheck protection, that allow for some of that. I don't know that, but yeah, certainly, in terms of just routine and rhythm, the routine and rhythm everybody settled into has just been disrupted big time. And it's not just for the kids; it's for as my British friends say, mum and dad as well.
Well, we've just seen, as we've gone back to school just in the last couple of weeks, just trying to get into the normal school routine. And we've always homeschooled our kids, but we have a bonus kiddo that's home with us now, because we have our little Addie girl who is home, and we're not used to having her home with us. And so having to get into new routines with her, and new, because it's before everybody was pretty self-sufficient as far as being able to, go to the bathroom, fix their meals, get a drink, all of those kinds of things. But now we've got diaper changes, and we've got, an extra kiddo that we have to prepare something to eat for, so it has been, I saw somebody posted and they were like, yeah, who's having a meltdown here on Wednesday? And I was like, Wednesday? I didn't even make it past Monday. That was when my meltdown was happening.
Make it to Monday.
I know. It was just, it was so, everything's just disrupted. It just is not the same as it's been, even though we're still schooling at home. There's so many restrictions. Our kids go to a co-op and so there's just, things are different, and expectations about what school was going to look like this year and how that was going to be. And, we've already had kids that have had to stay home and, be zoomed into, I can't believe Zoom is now like a verb. It's like something you do. It's not just a service anymore, but they were zoomed into their classrooms because they couldn't be on campus. And they said they didn't like it. They didn't like how it felt to be the only kid that wasn't in school, And so I think about all those kids that are going to be doing virtual learning and how that's going to work. And so, yeah, routines and rhythms are definitely out of whack right now. And we're all trying to find our new normal.
Well,
what that's going to look like.
I think sometimes we might be surprised to find out how, because a lot of times people talk about rituals and routines, but I'm so glad that you guys added rhythm to that. Because your sense of rhythm is formed in utero, and we talk about the negative in utero experience as part of the one of the risk factors for complex developmental trauma. But the truth of the matter is that your sense of rhythm is developed in the womb, because the resting heart rate of a typical pregnant woman in the West is 80 beats per minute. That is the resting heart rate, average resting heart rate of a pregnant lady. And so this idea, like so much of your life, works around rhythm, right? In when you are in the womb, that's all about the I don't know if that's 80 beats per minute or not. But there's a lot of research on this, right? And so it's calming. Anything that's 80 beats per minute is calming. It's soothing. It is connecting, right? Does anybody want to guess what the marching cadence of the United States Army is?
80 beats per minute?
Correct, Kayla. It's 80 beats per minute, right? It's part of that.
Did I win a prize?
Yes. But
you don't know what that is yet, huh?
A half.
Or he hesitates to say it for
no. I literally can't. I literally don't have jokes. I don't have anything.
Golly, I thought surely. I won
handy dandy empowered parent podcast stickers for your double insulated tumbler. It's all yours.
Oh, lucky me! And amazingly, it's already arrived.
Wow. Yes, folks, that's the kind of service.
Well played. Well played.
That's good.
But in all seriousness, it is connecting. It is soothing, right? And so when I first learned about this, this, Kayla, I have a playlist in my Spotify that's 80 beats per minute, and there are websites that will tell you the time signature of songs. And so you'll just search for stuff that's 80 beats per minute. Burning Love by Elvis Presley, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin, just a couple that come to mind. And so I have this whole 80 beats per minute playlist that is soothing to listen to when you're struggling. And so that sense of rhythm never leaves us. Sorry, we never lose it. And so I think it's important, because we were conditioned for rhythm, right? That's why the routines in your house, like I like to differentiate in terms of the rhythm of your house is different to the routines, because the routines make up the rhythm. The routines also part of the rituals. Yeah. And the way that I remember that is that a routine is something that you do, like brush your teeth. A ritual is something that you do that builds connection, like story time at bedtime, right? Which is why we always tell families, if you're mad at your kids, you still have to do the ritual. Like if you want to say bedtime's 30 minutes earlier tonight, okay, that's fine. As a parent, you can do that, but you know that you're signing up for the bedtime ritual 30 minutes in advance, because the children need to be reminded that even though things didn't end well, they are actually going to end well. You're reminded why that the children are fun. The children are reminded that you're reasonable, and that connection builds. At our house, some nights I'll do the bedtime rituals and routines. Sometimes Kayla will do them. Sometimes we'll do them together. But there's always some aspect of fun involved, whether that's mom reading a story, dad playing the guitar, us laying on our bed while the children pretend to be contestants on America's Got Talent. And, we're the judges or anything like that. But just some way for us to end the day on a high. Like tonight, I ended up having a long conversation with one of our children because they were really struggling, and what they just needed somebody to hear them. And when I finally got out of my own way and dialed into that reality, things are pretty good, and she's calmly sleeping in her bed right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think the rhythms can seem really off when you're trying to force a new routine.
Mm-hmm.
And everything just doesn't seem, or if you're trying to, I was talking to a mom today and we were just talking about the difference between a routine being kind of flexible. So a routine has components to it, but they don't always happen in the same order necessarily. They don't always happen at the same time. Whereas a strict schedule is, everybody must be awake by this time and doing this by this time. And which I have a tendency to fall back into those types of things because for me, that feels safe. If I'm like, okay, if everybody's awake by 8, out of bed by 8:30, had breakfast by 9, we're starting on this. But then I get really frustrated when those things don't happen because inevitably it takes me an hour to get one kid out of bed. And then it takes me, and then I'm just more frustrated because my schedule's not happening. Whereas a routine is after we wake up, we're going to get some breakfast. Now we might have some structure around, we're going to wake up between 8 and 8:30, or we're going to wake up between 8:30 and 9 or whatever. But it's also flexible. If we had a kid that stayed up late because they had anxiety and they couldn't fall asleep, then that routine is flexible and I'm going to let them sleep a little later in the morning, or I'm going to, maybe I'm going to make them some breakfast and have it ready before I go wake them up so that we're just moving a little faster. So I think the important thing for me between routines and schedules is that a routine is flexible and allows for you to say, hey, we all got to bed late last night because we were out doing whatever. And so our routine is still the same. It's just going to start a little later in the day. Or, man, that math assignment that we were doing took way longer than we thought it was going to take. We're going to scrap this next assignment we were going to do and do it another day. So, but the rhythms seem off every time you're trying to implement a new routine or a new type of schedule into your life, for sure.
Well, I think what you're saying though is when we tell people that creativity and flexibility are their friends, that's really saying, because we can become slaves to the routine. What was that? Was it Janet Jackson's song,
Yeah.
Chris slave to the rhythm?
Something like that.
We can become slaves to those things, and beholden to those things, and they can dictate our day. And then when things don't go according to the schedule that we have, then we get really upset, and we tend to get sideways with the kids. And that's why I think that I love rhythm more than I love routine, because routine can be as simple as brushing your teeth. But again, as Kayla said many times before, either on this podcast or in front of a group of people when I've been standing next to her, look, if you have to put your jammies on and brush your teeth as part of the routine, the bedtime routine, whether you put your jammies on first or brush your teeth first is irrelevant. But a lot of people get dialed into, put your pajamas on, then go brush your teeth. And somehow they just can't. And that's like beyond me, how you can get stuck in that one. But people do get stuck like that. And I'm like, just be flexible. It literally does not. It does not matter.
I just need the teeth brushed. I really don't care what order it happens in. And half the time, I don't even care if they end up in jammies. I just need the teeth brushed.
Yeah, boy, if you care about jammies, you're going to fight a lot of fights. Sweetie, where are your pajamas? They're downstairs. Well, you were just downstairs. I know, but I'm too lazy to go back down. And I said, so's Daddy. Good night, my sweet.
Good night. Sleep tight.
Hey, but points for the self-awareness there on being lazy. I mean,
Well, in my defense, no, I'm kidding. I'm not going to defend myself. I was lazy. Look at that for
No, and I
maturity.
think
No defense, no deny, don't defend, don't deflect.
But I think I think the routines give us the structure we need, but it's still while still allowing for the flexibility that we also need, because we need those times when we've got one kid that's melting down and not being like, hey, you're supposed to be in bed by 8:30. It's 8:35. Sorry, not talking to you anymore. Like moving on. We have to be able to be flexible within that bedtime, in that window, but while still giving them structure, because I think the structure keeps them safe and helps them feel safe. So if we're all loosey-goosey and it's like whenever you wake up, we'll get started, with our day, or whenever you do this and you can do it whenever you want. I think there has to be that balance between no structure, no routine, and strict scheduled every 10 minutes, here's what you're going to do. Here's what has to happen. This has to happen by this time. And I find it hard. I really do, because I want that routine, but I find myself going either into the do whatever you want. I've got stuff I need to get done. So just here's a list of things that have to happen today at some point. And then from 9 to 10, we're going to do math. And from 10 to 11, we're going to do grammar. And from 11 to 12,
Mommy's going to plan an event.
At 10:30, you can. Yeah. I mean, it just, I find myself going back and forth between the two extremes. And it's hard sometimes to find that routine that makes sense. And that gets us back into that rhythm that feels comfortable and right, because the routine, that rhythm is really important. It's really important to find that where you feel like the whole family's in sync. And some people are probably listening going, does that ever actually happen? Like, I don't know that we've ever felt in sync. But it does. I feel like it's happened at our house. But every year, like I kind of get like a redo every year in August and again in January. Like those are my two redo months where I get to go, okay, let's reevaluate what we've been doing and how it's working. And if we need to tweak something or flex something, or is it working? Yeah. Because sometimes it's just not working at all and we're trying to force it. And that's why everything seems out of sync. That's why the rhythm doesn't seem to be there for the family, because we're trying to force, like Ryan and I are not morning people. And we are late night people. We like to stay up late. We do not like to get up early. And there have been times where we have been like, we're going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and we're going to get all this stuff done. I mean, it's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. It's not working, because it just feels off. It just doesn't feel right. Now, can we go to bed a little bit earlier and get up a little bit earlier? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Ryan's shaking his head no. No, we can. We just have to be disciplined to do it. But trying to do something so drastically different has not worked for us. And it always just seems like our rhythm is completely off. And the same is true for our kids. None of our kids are morning people. So those of you who your kids wake up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, I am so sorry. I have never had that happen at our house. Our kids have never been like that. They've always been like, so we're recording this on a Sunday and church starts at 10 o'clock. And now, of course, in COVID church, you just have to be up by 9:55 in order to get to church on time. And so we're like at 9:55, we're like, can somebody please go find, and whatever siblings are still in bed, because inevitably there's usually a kid or two or three. This morning, I think there were 3 that were still in bed.
Well,
just as church was
one
about
of those
to start,
is my fault. Well, not really. I mean, my 17-year-old son, we were watching the Formula One qualifying yesterday for the Belgian Grand Prix. And he's like, what time's the race? And somehow I had got in my mind that it was at 6 o'clock. And I said, what's 6 a.m.? And he's like, let's get up and watch it. I'm like, I'm not getting up at 6 a.m. to watch car racing. And so he got up at 6 a.m. So when we got up at a little after 8 this morning, Kayla came down. He was sleeping on the couch because it was actually 8 a.m. Now, he didn't double check. So I suppose I should be happy that he trusts his daddy like that. But he also let me know that I couldn't tell time because he got up at 6 a.m. to watch car racing.
He said he got up, made himself a cup of tea so he could wake up, got all situated on the couch by 6 o'clock, and realized that there was nothing on at 6 o'clock. So I was like, but normally that doesn't happen. But so he just went back to bed.
Kayla,
He was like, I'm
actually,
done.
when you were talking earlier about the difference between being loosey-goosey and being schedule-driven, I mean, when we prepped for this episode, we didn't discuss this, but I think it morphed naturally to it. And that's about the difference in parenting styles, because what you basically said is your option, well, not your options, but the two options you laid out in that example were neglectful and authoritarian. And so that's your drill sergeant. I brought you into the world. I can take you out of it. When we teach in front of people, I ask who's raised by that person, and a lot of people our age, Chris Turner, raise their hands. Yeah. So there's that. And then so that's high structure, low nurture, and then there's the neglectful parent who's no structure and no nurture, and then the permissive parent who is no structure, high nurture. But you want to be the authoritative, which is both high structure and high nurture. And there's the thing that the message we try to get out: do not look at yourself and go, well, I'm really good at structure, but I'm literally poor at nurture, and then make your strength a weakness. What you have to do is make your weakness a strength, right? You can't go, well, I'm high structure, low nurture, so what I'll be is I will become low nurture and low structure. Okay, well, you're neglectful at that point. And kids are raised by neglectful parents tend to have the lowest the highest rates of poor outcomes as adults. That's what I try to say. I'm sorry that was so awkward. You have to get better at your weakness, and not so that you get a better weakness, so that you actually turn the weakness into a strength. Because a lot of times, a lot of us spend our time trying to make sure that we get better at what we're bad at, but we have to turn what we're bad at into the thing we're good at.
Yeah, the image that I kind of have of what we're talking about with the rhythms and the routines and rituals, but within structure, is bowling with the bumper rails up, right? Like the bumper rails is providing your structure. The routine, the rhythm we want to be in is the ball going down the lane and knocking over pins. We don't care if it bangs a few times. Well, some of us might care how many times we bang it off the bumper rails, but that
not me.
We shouldn't care so much about that it gets in the way of the objective, right? Which is knocking over those pins, or finishing school assignments, or going, getting the teeth brushed to get into bed. Whatever the pin we need knocked over is, the point is to get the ball down there, and those bumper rails provide our structure for it. Yeah, the routines and the rhythm might get a little wonky on the way down, but it'll happen all the same.
Okay, so that is good imagery. It's interesting imagery. But this is what I heard, and I think that we all do this. We don't celebrate success along the way. What we do is we look at where we are, we look at where we want to go, and until we get to where we want to go, we're not pleased. And so, to go with your analogy, we're standing over there, at the little ball return machine, and down at the end of the lane are the pins, and then we're only concerned about how many pins we knock over, unless the ball bounces off and up and down the bumpers, because then it gets annoying, right? So we are willing to lean into, and for lack of a better term, celebrate failures along the way, but we're reluctant to celebrate victories along the way. And I've never ever understood that about not just parents; it's the human condition, right? If you go back to the Old Testament, God kept telling the Israelites that every place that he did something good for them, to stack 12 rocks, so that when they came by that way, they could tell their children what had happened there. One of those first examples of that being the crossing of the Jordan into Canaan, right? The men, Joshua tells the men to stack 12 stones, so when they come by that way, they can tell the story to their children. And I wish we would stack stones in our lives. I wish that would be part of the rhythm and routines and rituals in our home, to celebrate victory along the way. But we often are reluctant to celebrate anything but knocking all the 10 pins down. But we will be critical about how many times the ball hits the bumpers, though. And the bumpers are good.
And I think sometimes...
Well, I'm sorry, babe. The bumpers are good because their purpose is to keep you out of the gutter. Right? I mean, they're good. Bumpers are only good. And sometimes we forget that.
Well, I think sometimes we're so close to the situation that we have a really hard time seeing that we've made progress. We expect, the first day of school for everybody to just fall into the new routine and there to be no hiccups and there to be no problems. The reality is the first day of school is like, when I was teaching in a classroom, the first day of school was mostly just figuring out the routines of the classroom. Like there was not a lot of learning that was happening on the first day of school. There might be a little lesson here, a little lesson there, but for the most part, it was just figuring out the routines and the rhythms of our classroom for the year. But at home, I expect the first day of school, we hit the ground running and we're going to do all the subjects and we're going to do all the things. And if we don't, then my day was a failure and I clearly need to rethink our whole schedule. Like the routine is just not working for us. And that's kind of where that's where I go sometimes is I forget how long it takes to get into a new routine and to find that new rhythm. And so I think as we're in a new school year, and especially with this crazy, people are doing all sorts of different things this year. Some people are homeschooling for the first time. They've never homeschooled before, but they couldn't imagine doing virtual schooling. And so, everybody's trying to find that new routine and that new rhythm for their family. But I think just grace upon grace upon grace for yourself, for your kids, and just realizing that it takes time to get into that new routine and to find your new rhythm for the school year. It's not going to happen right away.
Well, if you're going to ask for closing thoughts, I can't top that. So I will cede my time to Mrs. North's comments.
Thank you, Mr. North. Duly noted.
Thank you, Chair from over there.
Chair from over there. You look crazy.
Okay.
Well, I hope that helps some of our parents out there who are struggling with all of this at this time of year. And if you have a question for us that you'd like us to tackle here on the podcast, you can email it to us at info@onebighappyhome.com. If you can be concise and squeeze it into 280 characters, feel free to tweet it to us at onebighappyhome. We also have a Facebook group just for our podcast listeners. You can search for the Empowered Parent Podcast community, though I do believe we have a new stipulation on admittance. Do we not, Kayla?
Yes, you have to be a patron, Patreon subscriber.
There you go.
So if you go to patreon.com/empowered parent, I was like trying to remember what it was. Then you can be a subscriber at the $5 level or above, and you can get into that podcast group. And then we answer questions, and all of us are in that group answering questions. Plus, we have a ton of people in the group that are all just a wealth of knowledge and stuff. So it's a fun group to be part of.
Yes, ma'am.
And in addition to subscribing to the podcast on Patreon, you can subscribe to it in iTunes, the Google Play Store, or on Spotify. Just search for the Empowered Parent Podcast. If you've enjoyed and gotten value from our show, we would appreciate a review in any of these locations. The Empowered Parent Podcast is committed to helping parents of foster and adopted kids through connecting, correcting, and empowering principles. Thanks for listening.